I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, welcome to the Friday edition of Open Line. I'm both Colin Donovan and Jack Williams today, as Jack is at our EWTN radio conference here in Birmingham with a lot of our great affiliate members whose stations you yourselves are listening on. And so I'll be leading the parade of questions here today as well as taking them. And so without further ado, let me give you the phone numbers to call in and ask your questions. If you're in North America, it's an easy toll-free call, 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. And if you're outside North America, Europe, or wherever, you can call us by calling country code 1-205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. If you're watching us on our EWTN Radio Facebook page or on our EWTN YouTube channel, both of which we're streaming live on, you can ask a question right there in the question area of the Facebook page and the comment section of the channel. So you can do that. Or you can text us a message from your smartphone by texting 55000. That's 55000. And when you get a response back from our social media people, then you can text your first name and the question, and we'll get your question on the air. So it's been a very good week. We've had, as I noted, our EWTN radio conference in which the leaders of Catholic radio in the United States who belong to EWTN affiliates come to town, and I won't say they're wined and dined, although there's also good food and conversation, but opportunities for workshops on different matters related to running a radio station, on programming and so on, so on legal matters and so on. So it's a good week, and also a wonderful opportunity to visit the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hanceville in the monastery, and of course Mother Angelica's tomb is there in the crypt church. Well, let me go ahead and take a question here while we're waiting for calls to come in. There's no name on this one, but the question is, how can marriage be both an indissoluble union of one flesh and simultaneously a communion of persons, or a community of persons? This implies one entity, and the latter implies two individual entities. Thank you for answering my question. Well, this is one of the paradoxes of being a creature. The community of persons of marriage, husband and wife, man and woman, and only man and woman, is the reflection of the community of the Holy Trinity. Now, in the Trinity, of course, there are three persons, the Father, the Son, and their love, the Holy Spirit. And in the human community of marriage, there are the man, the woman, and the bond of love that is created by their exchange of vows, by their gift of themselves to the other, their donation of themselves, body and soul, in the entirety of their materiality to the other person, and the receiving of that other person's gift. So, like most analogies, they usually break down somewhere. In God, the unity of the three divine persons is a single divine nature. It transcends our understanding, of course, but we can understand analogously, as many have explained it, from the idea of the human mind, the intellect and the will, and sometimes the memory is used as a third element of that, but a spiritual reality which can be spoken of in two different ways, and likewise with the Godhead, three divine persons sharing one divine nature. obviously, the entity, if you will, of marriage runs up against the limitations of materiality. Man and woman can have a fundamental union of heart and mind and even of their bodies, but it can never be complete in the way that the union of the three divine persons are. So this is our human limitation. It is why there's always a striving for greater unity even on the human level, because clearly individuals don't lose their own aspirations, their own personal histories, their own personal private thoughts, and so on, and those are retained within marriage rightly. And so the unity that is strived for is, in the greatest possible sense, the same unity that is present in God. And that is that unity of love, that bond of love between the two individuals, which is represented by the marital bond created at the time of the exchange of vows. So this is the way that we use this language. It's a communion of persons, or a community of persons, to which, in the same way that God chooses to create the visible universe and us in it, husband and wife choose to expand their communion of persons to include the children that they create. And thus there is a family in which comes about as a result of the marriage. It still remains essentially and at its root this bond between the husband and wife, from which the other realities of marriage flow. Well, before we go to our break here, let's go right away to a question. We have John driving through Iowa, it looks like, listening on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 130. Good afternoon, John.
Hello, how you doing?
Pretty good. What's your question today?
I'd like to know what the church stance is on Masons and why.
Okay, I assume you're not talking about the great bricklayers and stonemasons, but Freemasons.
No, sir. The Masonics and the Shriners.
That's right, yeah. The Freemasonry, which is a theoretical unity, brotherhood, sort of based on the medieval guilds of the Masons and other things. The attitude of the church has been consistent regarding Freemasonry. If you read the literature of Freemasonry, they see themselves as a very early, even pre-Christian, even pre-Jewish. They trace themselves back, although I don't think there's any historical evidence for this at all, to the builders of Solomon's temple, predating revealed religion, and therefore a basic brotherhood of the human race that is beyond even Judaism and Christianity. In that respect, they're prepared to absorb members from any religious tradition who simply hold to, God as a supreme being and so on in a very general way. And the church has seen this as a kind of philosophical naturalism. In other words, it's clearly not revealed, but it's a philosophical naturalism that takes on a kind of religious dimension through the rites, the chaplaincies, the prayers, the history, the oaths, and the other things which in many ways parallel the liturgies and so on of revealed religion, both Jewish and Christian. And from that respect, the church's view on Masonry is in the negative. Now, granted, individual human beings, for their own motives of fellowship or whatever, come together. They may not give much regard to what the philosophical underpinnings and so on, and it's just grand theater or whatever. We know the good work of the Shriners and the work that Masons do in their communities in different respects, all of which is to be applauded. But from the point of view of the church, it's simply not compatible with Catholicism. And so a Catholic may not both simultaneously frequent the lodge and frequent Mass and the sacraments because of that incompatibility. And that is about a almost 300-year-old position of the magisterium on that. Did you have any follow-up?
Well, I I was checking on it because I got a nephew that joined them, and I tried to get him not to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was checking, and it said that their basis is on the mystics.
Yeah, and they don't mean the
I
Catholic mystics. They mean that they're a mystical order with all of these pre-Christian, pre-Jewish associations. And if you look at the names of the different levels of Masonry, that's reflected in the names of the levels and so on and so forth. So they don't mean that in the way that we understand the mystics, like St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and Teresa of Lisieux and, Catherine of Siena. That's not the way in which they understand it.
Good.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks for a great question, John. God bless. Safe driving. Well, let's take our first break, and when we come back, we've got Mary and Jean waiting on the line, and hopefully you'll call in too. Let me give you those numbers again. Inside North America, 800-585-9396, 800-585-9396, or outside North America, 1-205-271-2985.
Hello, this is Bishop Robert Baker from the Diocese of Birmingham in Alabama.
I'm Peggy Normandin, but you can call me Catholic.
Hello, friends. This is Father Wade Menezes of the Fathers of Mercy. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Encounter with Dan Demete and Patrick Rice is our new radio show for young adults.
The Holy Spirit is about a new and exciting work in the young church of today. On Encounter, we bring young adults the life-changing testimonies of ordinary people that launch them into lives of extraordinary mission. Their testimonies bring faith and power into the lives of everyone who listens.
Encounter with Dan Demete and Patrick Rice. The Spiritual Awakening continues tomorrow night, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Being part of EWTN Media Missionaries is a perfect way to help us fulfill our calling from Christ to make disciples of all nations. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com and join us in sharing the eternal word with the world.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The 9th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. We already discussed in the 6th commandment the problems of sexual sins themselves. What the Lord is looking at here is rooted in this word covet. To covet means to inordinately or inappropriately desire something or someone. And in this case, the Lord is saying to us that we are in no way to covet, to look with lust at another person, particularly our neighbor's wife, but others in general. And therefore, all pornography and things have to go. All entertaining of lustful thoughts has to go. And God can help us by His grace to do that. And therefore, in this commandment, He summons us to take authority over our thought life and our sexual passions. The 9th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, we're back to the Friday edition of Open Line, and let's go to another caller. We've got Mary in Lakewood, Colorado. Good afternoon, Mary.
Hello. Thank you so much for taking my call, and I'm so blessed that I can listen to Catholic radio. I have a question that has been concerning me for some time, and though I thoroughly still believe in the Pietà, there is a novena to St. Bridget that, from what I understand and read, and it's not in front of me, so I can't quote it exactly, but Jesus talked to St. Bridget and said to her, if ever anyone was to fulfill a year of the novena, that they and their lineage of family members and so on would go to heaven without going through purgatory. And I believe that, and I, of course, have said the novena by myself for a year, and my husband joined me the year before he died. So I need to know, because it doesn't seem to be a well-known or talked about novena. And always there is that little look of like, I believe what you're saying, but I'm not sure I believe what it is. that you're telling me.
Sure.
So would you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, my purpose would not be to defend the novena, which I don't know of any evidence for the historicity of that. First of all, there are two elements to that question. To what extent is St. Bridget really, and this is St. Bridget of Sweden, to what extent is she really the authoress of this and coming from private revelation? And to what extent can we give, if that's true, a question that I cannot answer and I don't believe is demonstrated, but let's say it were to be demonstrated that St. Bridget wrote this down and she claimed that the Lord gave it to her, that would give it credibility, her being a canonized saint. Then the next question would be, how would this be understood? And I would say that it would be difficult to explain consistent with Catholic theology the claim that is put forward in that book. And some other places, I believe that there are other prayers in there attributed to saints, release of soul, 1,000 souls from purgatory, and things of this nature. First of all, that suggests almost a magical view of if you do this thing, then all these things will come about. Our prayer to God is always conditioned on if it is your Lord, if it is your will. And if we're not saying that, and if we're not thinking that, or at least that is always our intention to pray that way, according to the Lord's will, nothing else will, of course, get answered unless it is His will, then there's something deficient in our prayer. We're just trying to impose on God and get God to be our valet and to go do these things we want Him to do. So the first thing is the humility and the docility that we bring to prayer. The other element of that is that being the case, it's ridiculous to think that saying a certain prayer will release 1,000 souls or multiple generations of our family and guarantee them heaven without going through purgatory. That would practically take away free will. I don't know how you would defend the doctrine of free will in that circumstance. Sure, God's providence can provide a lot of things, but if it was that easy, why would we need the Mass? Why would we need confession? Everybody could just say the St. Bridget prayers, and all their ancestors or future past, I'm not sure what's being promised there, but all of their descendants and ancestors would be released from to go to heaven and skip purgatory. So those kinds of claims are on their face suspect, and I would doubt the veracity of the connection to the saints that are claimed with respect to those prayers. And I think you are quite right to be suspicious of the validity of those prayers and of the claims that are associated with them. And I would also say this, some of those the prayers are beautiful, and it may very well be that the saint is the source of the prayer, but not of the extensive claims that are associated with the prayer, whether it's in historical writings or whether it's in a contemporary prayer book. Does that help?
Thank you for that. And I really understand about the fact that it is everyone's will, and it is their prayer time, and it is their change of heart that will get them closer to Jesus and bring them to that point where, but I felt like that believing and trusting that it is true that Jesus appeared to her and said these things to her, that doesn't mean that it's magical and things will happen.
Well, no, the point is, I think that is the part that is in doubt. I don't think the church would not have canonized an individual who makes such claims. Therefore, I doubt seriously the connection between the saint to whom the prayers are attributed and the claim that is associated with it.
Right.
And that being done, your belief in it will not make something that is not true and effective.
Right. But if you live the life that you want to live to be closer to God, and you have said this novena, and you continually ask the Lord to change your heart, and of course those you love that you're praying for, that in itself is, I believe, a way to trust the Lord that whatever He wills.
Well, that's true of any prayer. My point is, in that case, you have to sever all the claims from the prayer, and the prayer can be advantageous through the piety of individuals. But I do not believe that it is plausible that it's advantageous in freeing thousands of souls, as one claim, 1,000, or in one's descendants or ancestors, as the claim that you cited. The personal pious value of that and the disposal to God and believing it will not harm you, but neither will it accomplish the ends which are attributed to it. Okay, well, thank you for your call, and let's move on. I think our next caller is Jean. Good afternoon, Jean.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
In a conversation with a convert friend, she said that several hundred years ago the Catholic Church interpreted Genesis literally. Then it changed to more of thinking that it was a story. And her question, or I guess my question, is if the Church can change its teaching on this point, then why can't it do the same with other teachings?
Well, her assumption is incorrect. The Church has not changed its teaching on creation. Science has changed its teaching on creation. Science changes its teaching all the time. Let me give you an example, the great Galileo case. When Galileo put forward his claim, repeating a claim by an earlier man, Copernicus, the Church, the Pope and specifically, was concerned about his trying to give an interpretation to sacred Scripture. In other words, to say that that his view was overriding, as it were, what sacred Scripture taught. And when Galileo made that claim, almost all of the astronomers and other scientists in Europe and probably elsewhere didn't hold to the Copernican system. They held to the Ptolemaic system, and which had the Earth at the center of the universe. So you have two things going on. You have a scientific view, which obviously was wrong and got corrected in time, so that today, if you hold to the old Ptolemaic view, going back to Egypt and Greece, you'd be scientifically ridiculed. We know better from the science. So this is somewhat the situation also with the question of creation. We have in the Bible a text which the Church says is canonical, that it's inspired by God, and it's our task to interpret it. If we're interpreting it according to the science of any day, then we're not interpreting it religiously. Science is an independent discipline. It studies the heavens, or it studies biology, or it studies archaeology, or whatever it is, anthropology in the case of the history of man, and it draws conclusions, which can change. In fact, in science, those things are always evolving. My father, who is a geologist, when he first learned it, the geology was considered a static science, that the Earth had not really changed significantly in millions of years. And then in the 50s, this all changed. Plate tectonics, which had been something for which there had been inferential evidence for most of the 20th century, was now becoming well established. And now it's clear that the continents are sliding around on plates, and over time the shape of the continents change. They collide with each other. It explains earthquakes, mountain building, and other things that 60, 70 years ago would not have been understood that way at all. In fact, quite oppositely, as simply static geology. So science is always revising its theories. The question of creation, the Church has basically not changed its position since the 1940s, when Pius XII asserted that for a Catholic, it is dogmatically certain that God created man and woman, infused into them the human soul, and from them all of the human race came. He left open the question of how their bodies were formed, whether it could be by a special creation by which, in a very literal sense, God took the slime of the earth and formed Adam and took Eve from his rib, or whether this is a poetic way of describing the history of the first man and woman. These are questions which science would investigate, but the Church knows that the human soul is only created by God and therefore has come from God, and that is what makes us human in the strict sense. Be back after the hard break.
EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn.
I met the Pope when he came to Washington, D.C., and from that moment on, I knew that I had to combine my faith with journalism, my job. I love coming to work because I know that I can talk about God on television and my pro-life views. And now, not only do I share it internally, but I share it with a global audience. How great is that?
EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn. Weekdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
And welcome to Bookmark Brief. I'm Doug Keck. I just finished a wonderful interview with Jimmy Akin on his book, The Fathers Know Best, published by Catholic Answers. Now, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about this book, The Fathers Know Best.
Well, it's a book that goes into the writings of the early church fathers, and I organized it in a way to make it very easy for people to see how the church fathers taught the same things that the Catholic Church teaches today on a host of different subjects, whether it's salvation, or the Eucharist, or Mary, or the Pope, or even matters like contraception and abortion and homosexuality. I introduce you to the fathers, I let you know who they were, where they were from, and then I dig into their teachings in a subject-by-subject manner so you can look up for yourself the topics that interest you and see what they had to say.
The Fathers Know Best, published by Catholic Answers, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you so much for joining us here on EWTN's Bookmark Brief. I'm Doug Keck.
A lot of people listen to Catholic radio and get great information to help build their faith and support their faith. But there are also people out there who haven't yet built a relationship with God, and Catholic radio reaches them wherever they are. It evangelizes in a way like no other medium, and that's just one of the many reasons why Catholic radio is so important.
Jimmy Akin thinks Catholic radio is important. So should you.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Okay, we're back, and I was answering a question from Jean in Peoria, listening on St. Bernadette Radio, about creation and science. So let me go at that in another way. The Church sees that the role of faith is to teach us what God has revealed, and therefore the creation of man and woman as the spiritual creatures with an intellect and a will, persons with freedom, able to respond or reject God in their life and so on, that God is at the source of this. God is certainly at the source of each one of us in the creation of the soul, which is spiritual and can't simply arise from matter. What existed before that is, in terms of earlier hominids, if you want to use a scientific term, is irrelevant to the question of whether there was a first man and woman, but rather the fact that with the gift of the soul, Adam and Eve became the first of our rational, ensouled human beings. That's all that the Church is saying in that respect. it leaves to science the investigation of that, as it leads to astronomy, the investigation of the development of the material universe, and it makes the religious claim regarding the unity of the human race derived from one man and one woman. Now, it's interesting that genetics, this is done half humorously, I think, tongue-in-cheek. It speaks of Adamic Y in terms of a single progenitor of all men in the male chromosome, the Y chromosome, and it speaks of mitochondrial Eve in referring to a single female source of them, all the energy factories that exist in the cells of every human being who has ever lived. It doesn't put them in the same time zone or at the same place at the same time in history, but that is an always changing target anyway, and perhaps someday it will. But it's always problematic to start using science as seriously apologetic and say, well, here science proves one thing or another. No, the Church makes claims on the authority of God revealing, and she herself struggles to understand how exactly that's to be reconciled with the claims which nature itself. And so science is reading the book of nature. We're reading the book of the revealed word. They come from the same God. They must be reconcilable, but reconciling them and working all of that out will take probably the rest of human history until Christ returns. And so we don't want to make any too strong claims regarding reading Scripture as if we learn science from it. As I believe it was St. Jerome who said, we read the Bible not to learn how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven. And that's what its purpose is. Incidentally, it will tell us things, but then we look to the reality to see what the book of nature tells us, and these two should be reconcilable, even if we in our day don't understand how that can be. As regards to other teachings revealed by God, they're not going to change either, whether it's the Church's sexual teachings or social teachings or whatever they are. They're not going anywhere. And the claim that there are not just two sexes, but an infinite number of genders, that's rubbish, and you can claim all you want that that's science, and it fails the common sense test. There are all kinds of things today where people are claiming science is their ally. In reality, they've just abandoned common sense to favor some personal subjective view at our point in history. So I think certainly the Church is on solid ground in the way it approaches the issue of creation, leaving to science what is its task, and taking to herself the task of the faith, and especially the unity of the human race. Now, I want to go from that into a question that came in over YouTube, where Barry says, you've helped me to understand about how the human family, the family of God, must be reflected in the structure of the human community and society. What is our precise role in the service of each? Well, what are the two things that we talked about in terms of the Trinity earlier? And that is the unity of the persons in the one God. So we can talk about the unity of the man and the woman in the marriage and how that's the core of the family. We can then talk about the unity that exists within the family. We can talk about the unity within our local communities and societies, our civil jurisdictions of city, state, county, federal government, even around the world. And in all of these things, we have two touchstones, and that is the respect that is owed to each member of the community at whatever level, the dignity of each, and the unity of each. If we are all children of Adam and Eve, and we're not simply evolved beasts in different parts of the world, then we have no basis for an identity politics in which the greatest thing is my race or my ethnicity, or even the religion. If we have a religion and we're blessed with the Catholic faith or the Christian faith, praise God. This is a grace and a blessing we've received, but it's nothing we should triumph over in the sense that this makes us better than other people. If we are, I'm Irish. I'm derived from Irish and Scotsmen and a few Englishmen and Dutchmen thrown in on the side. And so I have a natural affinity for those societies and that long Celtic line of peoples. But that doesn't mean that I should, look with wild eyes at Germanic peoples or African peoples or Asian peoples, because you go back far enough, we're all united in the same human race. And so the role of seeing the reflection of God in our societies is to maintain both that individuality and that unity and the respect that we have for each other, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in a family, whether it's in government, whether it's in the world community. This is the thing that's actually breaking down across the board in our country and in our world. And the only solution is, I think, to be honest, the Christian faith, which tells us of the unity of all of us as children of God, created by God. And it gives in its proper place an appropriate pride in our own personal origins and our own histories of our country and our nation and so on, or even the accomplishments of our particular religious tradition. But at the same time, it doesn't disparage other people because they haven't received exactly the same blessings we've received. They've received blessings we haven't received. And only with that mutual respect and love can all of this be held in balance. And when it's not held in balance, you see what happens in the world as a result of that. So anyway, that's my little homiletic for the day on community and society. Well, let's go to Jeff driving through Michigan. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. What's your question today?
Well, I want to know, is sports, either the participation in sports or watching of sports, does the church consider that a sin?
Well, I hope not to. Otherwise, a lot of Catholic universities will have to disband their sporting programs. So I think that's a palpable no and a demonstrable
that's
no.
Kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought, because I had a Roman Catholic priest tell me that sports are sin.
Well, I think he might be talking like many other things if all you are is about sports, to the detriment of every other part of your life, social relationships and all of that, or if you're staying at home to watch the NFL on Sunday morning rather than going to Mass, yeah, there can be sin involved, sin against God or against particular individuals who are losing out because of your excessive preoccupation with something. But that'll be true of anything. If your hobby is sports memorabilia or stamp collecting or something like this. If you they're in excess, there's usually some vice. But in and of itself, you can look on our EWTN website in our document library and Google sports and anything like that. You will find multiple statements by popes. John Paul II used to do this regularly, sending messages to the Olympics and different things, applauding the social character of sports, the opportunity for building up character, winning gracefully and losing gracefully, and all of those kinds of attributes. So absolutely not. But like anything, there's usually some wrong in an excess. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I thought, because Pope John Paul was considered God's athlete.
He was, both spiritually and physically. He was pretty good athletically. So I don't know. Maybe he got out of the wrong side of the bed that day. I don't know, but I think that's not correct what you were told. So you were right and he was wrong.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's go to. Let's see. We've got a. Want to bring your attention to our EWTN religious catalog and the number of books, DVDs, and rosaries and so on that we have available there. Of course, we're coming up pretty soon on the season of Advent, so start thinking about what you need for For Advent, maybe to teach your children about the message of Christmas, Advent calendars and Jesse trees and these kinds of things. And you can find all of those at EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. So check that out and see what you need. I just bought myself 3 wonderful books on Fatima. I think one's called The Mystery of Fatima with lots of pictures and so on. So a lot of good stuff on at EWTN's religious catalog. Well, let's go to Christine in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. No, she's not ready yet. Well, let's do that next, and we'll take a question from Susan, who asks, a relative requested a priest in the parish consecrate a host for his wife who has celiac disease, and it was likely made of rice flour, as any gluten causes her distress. He was going to the evening meeting across the hall from the sanctuary and wanted to give the pyx to the priest for the consecration of the host, and he says, no need, keep it in your pocket and it will be consecrated. What are your thoughts on that? Well, one thing, rice is not a valid matter for a host, so if the host was made of rice, it would not be, could not be consecrated. There are sources. There's a community of nuns that produce virtually gluten-free hosts, and parishes can get a hold of it, or individuals can keep their own supply and bring them to their priest to be consecrated. That's one thing. And the other part is, no, you can't simply consecrate the host in the pocket or purse or jacket of a person. Communion should be seen, and this is in the liturgical documents, as coming from the sacrifice, and then going out from the sacrifice and sharing of the sacrifice of the Mass with the individual, with the sick person. And that's not going to be the case. There's also the question of whether it could really be consecrated in that way, because the priest must normally he be aware of the matter. This would seem to be met in this case. He's aware of it, but it shouldn't be at any great distance. Otherwise, why wouldn't everyone just bring hosts in their pocket, and then that would be the end of it? So I think on multiple grounds, a serious question as to the legitimacy of this, and certainly the validity of the consecration. And I would say in general, if you go to a Mass where you're not sure whether the matter is valid, it's not wheat and water alone, maybe it has some cinnamon and sugar in it or something, which used to be more of a problem than it is today, don't receive, because we should be receiving valid matter. And if you receive and give adoration to to something which is not Christ, you would at least materially be guilty of idolatry. The really culpable person, of course, would be the priest that would suggest that you would do that or provide hosts which are questionably valid. But we should not receive if we have doubts about the validity. The validity is guaranteed by 3 things, maybe 4. The validity of the priest, that it really is a priest. This is certainly taken care of in our parishes where the priest is known and ordained by the bishop and so on. That the matter is valid, that it is wheat, flour, and water only. That may not be obtainable, knowable until you receive it and find otherwise. Although I remember attending a parish one time 30 years ago now, where the palpable smell of brown sugar and cinnamon coming off the basket of large particles of bread, ostensibly bread, I simply didn't receive. There was no way that could have been valid. Thankfully, that kind of abuse is very rare, if non-existent today. So the validity of the matter, if it's not valid, it shouldn't be received. And then, of course, it assumes that the Mass the consecration is validly made, and that would be known by the use of the form that is provided in the Missal, especially the words, "This is my body, this is my blood." and both formulas present in the Mass. So if that's done, you're virtually guaranteed, short of some fraud being perpetrated by the celebrant, to have received our Lord. And that's what we assume when we receive from a Catholic priest, and that's what we deserve when we receive from a Catholic priest. So, Susan, don't settle for anything less. Now let's go to Christine in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Good afternoon, Christine. What's your question today?
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. I have been looking at high schools, Catholic high schools, for my daughter. And I went to an open house in one local here, and I was concerned because when I was reviewing the literature afterwards, I saw this thing about liturgical dance, because some of the students in this school, there was a picture of them standing up, in front of the altar with these white gowns on and their hands out looking like angels. And it said, that they participate in liturgical dance and, your child can get involved. And what is this liturgical dance thing that's going on? So I went on YouTube and saw some videos that were very disturbing. And I thought, is this even allowed to be?
The short answer is no. That's another case of more geriatric clergy reliving the glory days of the 70s and allowing this kind of nonsense. The Church allows liturgical dance, and this is in the norms. You can find it in the norms on the Vatican's website or on EWTN's website regarding what's called enculturation. If you're a Native American or an African or some of the Asian cultures, Aboriginal cultures, say in Australia, in which dance forms religious expression, the Church says that devoid of the pagan elements of it, or the things that would be manifestly profession or continuing profession of paganism, there can be legitimate ways to incorporate that into the liturgy. And that's done in particular cases with the permission of the bishops and of course, the Holy See. And so sometimes you will see Native American celebrations, you will see some expressions of this, and Asian celebrations, African, and so on. And it's legitimate there. However, it's sort of fake enculturation when we white European here in North America introduce liturgical dance. It's artificial. Dance is for us a secular thing. And so the introduction of a secular approach and practice into the liturgy is foreign to the liturgy. This is the logic of Rome. We're not coming from cultures in which this is an intimate spiritual expression that has a long history in that culture or among those people. Where you see it in the Church in the last 30, 40 years is as a way, particularly in more feminist circles, to get women participating in the liturgy. I saw this at an ordination once. You see it occasionally. I'm surprised you called. I've not heard of this in a very long time. There's no basis in the liturgy of the Church for this, except as I've described and as in the enculturation documents. There's no basis in our own culture generally, unless you're going to a parish that it's Native Americans or something like that. If you go sometimes to the Kateri Tekakwitha celebrations, they have this, and rightly so. That's part of their religious expression. And when they were Catholicized, there was a way to incorporate that and use it because they have historically expressed themselves through gesture, through dance, and so on and so forth. But for us, if that's the case in Pennsylvania, then I presume the parish is on tribal lands and that this is a historic expression of that people. There really, frankly, is no basis in church law to permit that. With this exception, it can be outside of the Mass itself. So there could be some presentation before the Mass begins or after the Mass ends, but between in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and the Mass is ended, there should not be liturgical dance. So I guess it gets down to the particulars of the case, is what is their purpose? I think it would probably make you look a little deeper at what your daughter will learn in that particular school, however. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. I greatly appreciate it. And it is an all-girls school, too, so I'm wondering if, like you said, they're trying to make the girls feel more included or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, they have to be included according to the norms, not according to the principles or somebody else's. And there is no basis in the norms, assuming that you have no particular ethnic or historical reason for it. And that's what the norms provide for. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for your call. Let's go to Chris in Vero Beach, Florida. Good afternoon, Chris.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having a trouble with the latest unbiblical statement by Pope Francis, where he says the death penalty cannot be, it has to go, and has to be totally rejected, which is totally, it's completely unbiblical. We all know the Noahic covenant has never been abrogated. And it's absolutely completely opposite of what Pauline theology is very clear about that in Romans 13:4, when they uses the imagery of the sword. The sword is for capital punishment. And that's why you have all these blood-bespattered cities like Baltimore, these ostensibly Catholic cities the blood is flowing in the streets.
Do you have a question or do you just have a comment? Well, first of all, that's frankly not a Catholic way of looking at it. It has to be based on the magisterium and what the tradition has. Until now, the tradition certainly has affirmed the right of the state to execute capital punishment. Let's go back a little bit further in history, though, and look at the fact that during the years of the Roman persecutions, while you could be in the army and fight in war, you could not be a Christian and execute capital punishment. You could not be a judge. You could not be a senior legionnaire, where you might have to find somebody guilty of a capital offense and put that soldier to death. This was not allowed to the church and to Christians. With time and the Christianization of the empire, that changed. I think what we're seeing today as a practical matter is certainly a restoration of the view of the early church in this respect, and that is, how just is the application of capital punishment? A number of academic studies have shown it's quite unjust. Historically, of course, we know the problems of African Americans in the South and so on. But even aside from that, we look at the question of capital punishment as a matter of justice. You're right. That's settled. We have a right in justice to defend our society as we do our country, as we do our own physical person. And yet, it's still true that Christ recommends meekness, turn the other cheek. Now, we can do that as individuals. Our government is in a position they can't really do it. So I don't know what the ultimate answer to your question, but I think you're describing it in too much of a black and white. There may be a basis for arguing in the tradition that while, as a matter of justice, capital punishment is legitimate, that we should be holding ourselves to a higher standard, as they did in the early church. It would be up to the Pope to articulate that and then to apply his authority at an appropriate level. That's a question we'll have to wait and see. But if he does apply it with appropriate authority, we would be obliged to accept that. It wouldn't change the justice of it, but it would require what is expected of us as brothers and sisters of Christ in our day. Well, thank you for your great questions, and I'll be back with you next week. God bless until then.